What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello, and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that is frankly obsessed with leadership. I'm guest host James Thomas, and in each episode of the podcast, we're joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, and presidents. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from caring about what's fair to how people are faring in care, and of course the innovation and successes that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course, current co-chair of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Sam Harrison, Director at Continued Care. Sam's mother set up Continued Care in 1993, with Sam becoming the director in the early 2000s. The home care provider has grown organically over the years, filling the needs of the community of Harrogate it serves so loyally. Hi, Sam, and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast.
Hi, James. Thank you.
Very good to have you on here today. I think the first thing we need to do is catch up a little. If you could tell me what you've been up to in the year or so since you wrote your best practice article for the Parliamentary Review, I think that'd be a good start.
Yeah, no, that's great. A lot of things have happened for us, really, a lot of positive things. We were delighted and very honoured to be rated outstanding in our service by CQC last January. Oh, sorry. No, it wasn't January, actually. It was January this year. Yeah. So we received an outstanding. So we're very proud of that because it was a huge achievement for our service because it's quite a fast-paced service and it takes, quite a lot of hard work to manage it. And we then went on, which was a really good experience at the Great British Care Awards, the actual national finals in March in Birmingham this year.
Excellent.
We won the Frontline Leaders Award, so one of our management team from Harrogate won the National Frontline Leader for, across home care. So
fantastic. That
was a very proud moment. And then we had 8 representations this October at the regional heats in the Great British Care Awards, just recognising social care and the different contributions that people make. So home care awards and dignity and respect awards. So we were finalists in that for 8 different categories, and then we were immensely proud and quite surprised to win the care employer home care on the night. So we now will go back through to the national finals for that and be interviewed. Excellent. And it's a huge thing really within social care to be recognised in that way.
Well, it sounds like you're going to have to get a larger trophy cabinet.
I know. But actually what we can't lose sight of is the people that we, support and all the carers and, and the clients that we support in the community. And that's what it's about. It's not really about the awards. It is about recognition for staff. But,
of course.
It's the people that matter.
Well, I'm sure they'll be just as pleased for you as anyone else will be. Yeah. Now, Sam, I always like to go back to the sort of beginning a bit, just to frame the organisation. Tell me a little about the sort of origin story of the organisation. Were you there when it was founded? Were you at the helm, or did you come in later?
Well, I was there at the beginning when it was founded, but it's a family-run organisation, right. And my mum founded it in 1992. And at that point, I was actually training as a nurse. So I didn't actually come into the business until about 2003.
Okay.
And then it sort of developed from there.
Quite a sort of broad follow-up to this, but what caused the organisation to be set up? And this might be a silly thing to say now with all the awards you just mentioned, but do you think it's met or potentially even exceeded the goals that you would have had or your mother would have had back then?
Yeah, well, I think care has changed because actually when it was started, it was just as the Community Care Act was introduced. And actually she ran a nursing home in Harrogate. And what actually happened was the local community, some neighbours came in and said, could you actually provide some care and support for, my mum or my dad? And we ended up, that's how it started. We ended up going out and helping people from the nursing home to help with sort of getting them up and getting ready for the day, and sometimes even sort of giving meals prepared by the nursing home and sending them out. And then it just sort of developed from there that we then set up a home care service. And really the demand for home care over the years, over the decades really, has just increased. And obviously people want to remain in their own homes and be supported in that environment. And so home care in general has just grown and developed. And I think our, business has just reflected what people want. And, it's just grown from there, really.
Well, it's great to see something so organic. And it's something I was struck by in your best practice article, how expansive and sort of holistic your operation is. It covers sort of all parts of home care, whether it's, I think you said it was 15-minute pop-in visits to 24-hour live-in care for 250 clients. How do you think this sort of broad style of operating has helped you move forward and learn more about the industry?
Well, I think, like I explained at the introduction, it's a fast-paced service. People are having 15-minute visits, and sometimes that's just to check to make sure that they are okay. People are having half-an-hour visits, and then all the way up to support. We provide 24-hour care, and it really depends on what the person wants. And I think because it's quite fast-paced, and there is we're looking after complex problems and complex health issues, and it's not just health and it's not just social care, it's environmental and social, with housing and things that we are now involved with. And I think, as a service, we've become very reflective about how we deliver our outcomes to people so that we can make sure that we actually meet their needs. And it might not just be the social care needs that we're meeting. It's everything. And that's how we need to deliver a service, because that's actually, if you listen to what people want, that's what they need.
No, it's always interesting to hear it from people with such experience. Now, an important point, and I know something that's also quite close to your heart. You mentioned in your best practice article there's a misrepresentation, the mischaracterization of the care industry, where people are working hard, often low-paid jobs for long hours, yet being undervalued, really, in how they're seen. Why do you think this is the case, and how do you see it being fixed?
Well, if I could fix it, I think everybody would really want to listen to what I'd have to say. But I think it does need fixing, and it needs investing in. And people, and when I say investing, that's not just monetary, that's other investment, training, opportunities, people seeing it as a career. I feel very passionately that even though I come from a background in nursing and the NHS, that social care offers the same opportunities and careers, and there's a great career structure for people, to come into the service. But I think the public perception of what social care is, sometimes I think there's a lack of understanding, and how actually the NHS and social care really work in tandem. They coexist. One can't exist without the other. And I think if people recognise the importance of that and the contributions that carers and social workers and managers work to ensure that there is, a safe service and a quality service being delivered to everybody who needs care, then, I think people would invest more, in it as a service, and recognise the important contributions that, carers and individuals make to home care.
Now, you work in a world, of course, where you are caring for others, but I know a big focus of yours is caring for the carers and the people involved, the staff. How do you go about making sure that your staff do get the support that they need?
Well, I think it's really important, like you identified, James, to support your staff, because they are doing a valuable job, and it is hard work, and it can be stressful, and so we have got support, and we've got a good network within our within our organisation. We ensure that everybody has one-to-ones, and we've got a mentor. We have a really fabulous induction team which support people from the start and buddy up with with carers. We also like to support people to be involved with our charitable community links that we have, and we find that the carers enjoy that aspect of their role as well, and supporting local charities.
You work with an art therapy charity for people with dementia, don't you? That's one of your connections.
We do, yeah, we do in Settle. That's correct, and we support that charity there. But I'm talking about local charities as well to us here. So, like the staff get involved with Movember. They've just recently this week climbed Simon's Seat and done a charity walk. We have in this area the cycling UCI championships, and there was the official sportif that we got involved with. And I think it's about valuing people and the contributions they make and looking after them, and respecting the good work and hard work that they do. I mean, we do obviously do a lot of engagement with our staff and through supervisions and one-to-ones. And we also, we've just like taken a suggestion box, and when staff suggest things, we've always had a "you said, we've done." I don't know if I said that the right way around, actually. They've said and we've done. And one of the things that they wanted to do was they chose a charity to support this year as our charity. And we do lots of different things to value what they do. Long service awards, Carer of the Month awards, recognition in, regional and national social care.
Well, it sounds like the right sort of thing to make sure that ethos is created.
Yeah. So we do try.
We'll touch briefly on the political, though we won't go too deep, as I'm sure we could stay here all day. What would you like the government, whether it's the same one or a different one that comes in, to focus on in relation to the sector? What would be the sort of the broad thing that you would most like to be seen, paid attention to?
I think there's a number of things. I think one of the things would be to raise the profile of social care and acknowledge, the positive contributions that carers, professional carers, and carers, family carers make to the good work that goes on in social care. I think also, I touched on it earlier, to invest in social care. I can't. I know it's a very difficult subject for government to look at, but it does need to be, on the same footing as the NHS. We are a larger employer in social care than the NHS, and we work supporting each other. So it needs to be acknowledged, and and for social care to be recognised really, and have the investment and funding to future-proof it, because the demand for social care almost is out. We can't supply. The demand is greater than our supply, and we need to look at that and make sure for the future that we have enough.
So yes, I think I broadly agree, and we'll try and make sure we get this recording on the Prime Minister's desk as soon as possible, so that they can take the appropriate feedback, because I think you're speaking a lot of sense. Now, for anyone who, for young people coming into the industry, obviously we've tapped into a little about the misrepresentation of the field. What would you say to young people thinking about entering the care sector now, to sort of stop them feeling a bit overwhelmed?
Overwhelmed? Well, I don't think that people would feel overwhelmed. I think it's an excellent career. There is lots of opportunities within care. It's exciting. No day is the same. It's not it's not a boring job. We're talking about supporting people and encouraging people to get the best outcomes for themselves. In their own homes. And I just think I would encourage anybody to come into social care. Because it's really positive, and actually, there's some really positive, good work going on, and there's a big career structure there, and there's lots of opportunities for people. So I would say 100%.
Well, it's great to hear someone with so much sort of understanding and appreciation of the industry recommending it to people in the younger age group, because there's nothing that's going to sort of sell the idea more. We're going to end on a potentially slightly tricky question, or at least put you on the spot a bit. Tell me a story about a specific client's journey that you've been a part of that sort of made you feel like it was all worth it.
Well, we had a client, actually. You have put me on the spot here, haven't you, said whether or not this is the right thing. But we had a client, actually, who wanted to come home. They were actually in a nursing home, and they wanted to come back and join their wife at home. And they'd been in a nursing home, actually, for a few months. And we went through the normal processes that we would. And actually, we were contacted by the council about looking at this person to see if we could get them home. And we did get them home, and we got them home successfully, and they were, they enjoyed being at home. They enjoyed just little things that they weren't able to do because they were separated from their partner who they had originally obviously been with. And one of the things that stuck with me is that he came home and he used to be in the RAF, and he was always very distinguished and had a moustache. But actually, it's in the home he hadn't got that, and he came home, and that was one of the first things he said to me: is "I've grown my moustache back." And I know that sounds a bit bizarre for me to tell you that story, but I thought, well, that person's an individual, and they've got to the age of maybe 80 or 85, and they've had all those life experiences, all those work experiences, and to come back home from a different environment, to be back in his own home, and to have a semblance of an engagement with the community and with his friends again was just wonderful. And actually, I felt really pleased that we had achieved that, and they had moved back out into the back into the family home. And I thought that there was some really positive, even though there were only small changes that were made.
I think that's
and at the end of the day, those little things make a difference, don't they, to somebody?
No, that's a really nice way to sum that up. Actually, I think that what you've sort of pinned there is the idea of someone having their own identity given back to them through the work that you do, and it's actually quite nice that it can be summed up in such a what seems like frivolous but actually quite poignant manner. So that's exactly what I was looking for. I think that's all we've got time for today, Sam, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Some wonderful work, and it's really important and interesting to hear the sort of deeper side of it. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen.
Not at all.
Okay. Thanks, Jane.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Sam Harrison, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Continued Care are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming out now is our usual host, Jonathan White's interview with the Parliamentary Review's co-chair, Lord Pickles. Lord Pickles was Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government under David Cameron before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the UK's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist, or flags to you and me. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Now back to Jonathan.
Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40-odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments that introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament, because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I've found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice. But
well, I always used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians aren't interested, because honestly, as you'll know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. And I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story. Most people might guess that a dialogue Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunkett was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together. And if anything, we're more divided. I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition, I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. You can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastic new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was your proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Trouble Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state. And it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, you're stepped down being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress it. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old males cycling to evensong and warband. Yeah, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think it very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working with and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, 7 years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. and we need to kind of understand the Anstalt-Gruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long way. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important. People do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine it could be actually very content and happy. The former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you look quite unscathed from it.
I can't. He was very nice about
Yes.
it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
That's, but it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time. But I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know this is going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off for a winter stroll along the River Thames, whiskey in hand, as I contemplate the next chapter of our great mission of raising those standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.